Have you ever wondered how close you've come to danger without even realizing it? At Shivering Vault, we take you there, one story at a time. But before you drift off, consider liking this video, commenting where you're watching from and at what time, and subscribing to keep these chilling stories coming. Now, let's dive into these unsettling tales. This happened a few years ago, back when I was in my second year of college. I was 20, still living at home in this quiet suburb just outside San Antonio, Texas. My major was education, and I did a lot of part-time babysitting gigs, mostly for neighbors or families that needed a sitter last minute. That night, I had taken a job with the Callahans. They were this really nice family that lived about 10 minutes from my house. Super normal. The dad was a dentist, I think, and the mom ran some kind of home decor Instagram or something. Two kids, Lucy, who was 7, and Noah, who had just turned 5. Both were polite, kind of shy, and super attached to each other. They were the kind of kids that didn't talk much until they felt comfortable around you, and once they did, they wouldn't stop. The Callahans had this big house on a corner lot. One of those places with a wide lawn, a 2-car garage, white stone exterior, very modern but cozy. The kind of house with quiet hallways and clean hardwood floors that echo a little when you walk. They had a big fenced backyard with a live oak tree that looked older than the neighborhood itself. Built into the tree, probably 10 feet off the ground, was this weathered old wooden tree house. It looked like it had been there forever. No ladder, though, just a rope hanging down. It was early spring, and the weather had been kind of all over the place. Warm during the day, but storms were hitting pretty regularly in the evenings. That Saturday started out hot and dry. I got to their house around 4:30 p.m. The parents were going out for some kind of dinner party, and they said they'd be back before midnight. By the time the sun started setting, the wind had picked up. Big gray clouds were rolling in. I could smell the rain in the air. You ever smell that? That dusty electric smell? That was everywhere. We made popcorn. I let the kids pick out a few movies, some animated stuff on Disney Plus, and we got cozy in the living room with blankets and snacks. It was just a regular, quiet night. At least it started that way. It was just after 9 when the power cut out. No warning. Just boom. Complete silence and then darkness. The TV went black. The house went totally still, except for the wind screaming outside. I sat up straight on the couch, heart thudding a bit harder than it should have. The kids went quiet. You could feel how tense they were just sitting there, frozen under their blanket. I got up, told them it was probably just the storm and that the lights would come back soon. I found a few candles in a drawer near the kitchen, lit them, and placed them around the living room. Soft orange light flickered across the walls. The kids huddled close to me. I kept trying to distract them, made up silly stories, tried to turn it into an adventure. And then Lucy, quiet, serious Lucy, looked up at me and said, "There's someone in the treehouse." I remember just stopping. My hand froze in the middle of adjusting the candle. I looked at her and kind of forced a smile. "Sweetie, what do you mean?" She pointed toward the backyard window. "I saw him when the lightning came. He was just standing there, watching us." I didn't want to freak them out, but inside my chest felt tight. My hands were cold. I slowly got up and walked over to the window. The rain was pouring now, heavy, relentless. I pulled the curtain aside just a bit and stared out, and then lightning, a bright white flash. In that flash, for the briefest second, I saw a figure, a human shape, hunched slightly, standing near the base of the treehouse. No umbrella, no flashlight, just standing there in the storm. I shut the curtain fast. My mind was racing. My throat felt dry. I locked the back door, checked the other doors too, all locked. I grabbed the landline and dialed 911. My cell phone had no service by that point, just dead bars. I told the dispatcher everything, about the blackout, the kids, the treehouse, the figure. She told me to stay on the line, stay calm, and that they were sending officers out right away. I grabbed a kitchen knife. I remember thinking how dumb I probably looked, holding that knife with shaking hands, but it felt better than nothing. I made the kids sit close to me on the couch again. Lucy kept staring at the back window. Noah was crying softly, hugging her. Then we heard it, the scratching at the back door. It wasn't loud. It was so soft you'd miss it if you weren't paying attention. But I heard it, and so did Lucy. Her eyes got huge. I could hear her breathing faster. I turned toward the kitchen and saw the door, the same one I had locked minutes ago, shaking just a little, not rattling, just pressure. Someone pressing on it gently, like they were testing it. I held the knife tighter. I wanted to yell or scream or run. But I didn't want to leave the kids. I didn't want to show them I was scared, even though I was more terrified than I'd ever been in my life. We just sat there, in the dark, listening. The scratching stopped after a while, but I swear to God I heard whispering, barely there, not words I could understand, just the sound of someone's voice, too low to make out, too close for comfort. It felt like hours, but maybe 10 minutes later, the cops showed up. Blue and red lights cut through the rain. I ran to the door and opened it before they even knocked. I was shaking. I couldn't even get my words out right. They told me to stay inside with the kids while they checked the yard. A few minutes passed. Then one of the officers came back in. He asked me if I'd noticed anything missing from the backyard. I said, no. I hadn't really looked. Then he asked me if I'd been up in the treehouse. I said no. I didn't even know if it was still safe to climb. I told him there was no ladder, just a rope. He nodded, then asked me to come take a look. Inside the treehouse, they found a sleeping bag, dirty, worn, and cans of food, mostly baked beans, some tuna, a pack of cigarettes half empty, a plastic bag with a few torn comic books, and worst of all, drawings. Crude, childish drawings of two kids playing in a yard. One of them was Lucy, the other definitely Noah. Someone had been living up there, watching, for who knows how long. One of the officers guessed it might have been a transient, and maybe someone using the old treehouse as a hideout. But the thing is, the Callahans didn't know. They said the treehouse had just always been there when they bought the house 2 years ago. They'd never gone up into it, and they never thought much of it because the kids never played in it. No one saw where the guy went. They searched the whole neighborhood, never found him. I quit babysitting after that night. I just couldn't do it anymore. Every sound, every flicker of light would send me spiraling. Whenever it storms now, I don't sleep. I just sit at the window, watching the backyard, because sometimes I still feel like someone's out there. It's been a couple years now, and I still think about it, especially when I hear thunder in the distance. I was 21 back then, in my third year of college, studying environmental science. The stress was eating me up. Assignments, group projects, trying to keep up with rent and all that. I just needed a damn break, so I borrowed my uncle's old RV. Nothing fancy, just a small beat-up rig with a bunk, stove, and a bathroom that smelled like plastic and mildew, no matter how many air fresheners you stuck in there. I didn't want to go far, just needed somewhere quiet. I picked a campground near Lake Buchanan in Texas. Not a huge place, maybe 8 or 9 spots, and only a couple other people were there when I arrived Friday afternoon. It was perfect, peaceful, the way I like it. I set up at the far end of the grounds where I had trees on both sides. I remember sitting in one of those cheap fold-out chairs with a book in my hand, feet kicked up, a half-warm beer by my side, just listening to the wind move through the trees. It was one of those warm, sticky Texas evenings, with the cicadas buzzing so loud they almost sound electric. You could hear them over everything. That first night was just normal. I grilled a couple burgers on my little portable propane grill, watched the stars for a while. Insane how clear the sky gets out there. and then crashed out early. Slept solid, no weird dreams or anything. Just the sounds of crickets, wind through pine trees, the occasional owl hoot. Exactly what I needed. Now, the second night, that's when things got weird and bad. Saturday had been muggy as hell. I went for a walk earlier that afternoon, maybe a mile or so up one of the dirt trails behind the camp area. Came back drenched in sweat, so I just sat under the awning reading for most of the afternoon. Around 6, I noticed the sky was starting to look a little dark out west. Nothing crazy, just clouds starting to bunch up. I didn't think much of it. Forecast hadn't said anything about rain, and in Texas, you get used to those moody skies. Still, I packed away some of the outdoor stuff just in case. Around 9, I was back inside the RV watching a downloaded movie on my laptop. I remember hearing the first rumbles of thunder just before the end of it. The RV started swaying just slightly. Not hard, but you feel every little gust in those old rigs. I looked out the window and lightning was lighting up the tree line. That's when I realized how dark it had gotten, real fast. I decided to just turn in. Got into my bunk, pulled the curtain across the small sleeping area, and lay there listening to the storm ramp up. The rain came down hard. Like, I've heard storms before, but this was deafening. The wind was howling through the trees like it had teeth, and every so often lightning would hit close enough that the whole RV lit up inside for a second. I was having a hard time falling asleep. Kept checking the windows to make sure a branch wasn't about to come flying through. It was around 2:30 a.m. when I was almost asleep, but not quite, when something snapped me fully awake. It was subtle at first. Not a noise exactly, more like a shift in energy. I don't know how to describe it. Then I heard it. Footsteps outside. Slow, wet, crunching footsteps through the gravel and mud. I froze. For a second, I told myself it was just another camper, maybe walking to the bathroom, maybe checking their setup. But no flashlight. And the way the footsteps moved, slow, like whoever it was wasn't in any kind of hurry, just strolling through a thunderstorm like it was nothing. Then came the knock. 3 dull, heavy thuds right on the RV door. My blood went cold. I sat up and moved slowly toward the little kitchenette area where I had a better view of the door. Lightning flashed again, and for a split second I saw him. A guy standing outside, soaked head to toe, hood over his head, water pouring off him. His left hand was raised like he was about to knock again, but what froze me up wasn't that. It was his right hand, down by his side, holding a crowbar. I couldn't see much of his face, just his mouth and chin. But his posture, his body language, he wasn't desperate. He wasn't scared or cold. He looked calm, too calm. Then he knocked again, this time louder. "Hey, man," he shouted over the storm. "My car broke down. I just need to dry off for a second. Come on." Something about his voice, it was forced, like he was trying too hard to sound casual, friendly. But he wasn't friendly, not even close. I forced my voice to come out steady, but it cracked a little. "Sorry, I can't help you, man. I'm not opening the door." He paused. "Seriously, man, I'm freezing out here. Just for a minute. You got a heart or what?" I stayed quiet. Then I saw his expression change. His jaw clenched. I saw it in the lightning flash, and suddenly he lunged at the door. I didn't even think. I ran to the front and hit the horn, just laid on it, blasting it over and over like a maniac. It was loud as hell and cut through the thunder like a siren. The guy slammed his shoulder into the door. I saw the handle jerk. He was trying to force it. The whole RV rocked slightly. I screamed at him, "Go away! I'm calling the cops!" I don't know if it was luck or the horn or both, but just then I saw flashlights bobbing through the trees. 2, maybe 3 other campers running over through the rain, yelling out. The guy froze. Then he bolted, took off into the woods without saying another word. I opened the door once the others got there. I was shaking so bad I couldn't hold my phone steady. One of the guys, a burly dude named Rob, who said he used to be Army, took off after the guy with a flashlight. The others stayed with me, trying to calm me down and checking the RV to make sure nothing was damaged too badly. The cops came maybe 20 minutes later. They caught the guy hiding under a tarp behind a stack of logs near the tree line. He had tried to ditch the crowbar, but they found it stuck in the mud not far from him. Turns out he'd been lurking around the camp earlier that night, trying to break into other RVs. He'd already messed with a retired couple's truck window before he came to mine. No one got hurt, thank God, but apparently he had a record. Burglary, aggravated assault, the whole nine. The next morning, the storm had cleared and the sun came out like nothing had happened. I stepped outside and walked around the RV slowly. There were muddy prints all over the lower paneling, deep gouges scratched into the door frame where the crowbar had dug into the paint. One of the windows had a crack in it. Must have been where he tried to wedge it open. I packed up and left an hour later. I haven't been camping alone since, probably never will again. It was the fall, and in Texas that means the weather can change on a dime. The sky had been gray all day, the clouds hanging low and thick, but it wasn't until evening when the storm really started to pick up. By the time the clock hit 7:30 p.m., the rain started coming down in sheets. Big, fat drops hit the roof with a constant drumming sound that almost drowned out the thunder. My wife, Jessica, my 2 kids, and I were all sitting in the living room trying to make the best of it. We didn't have any power, of course. Texas storms tend to knock out power pretty quickly, but we still had our candles flickering on the coffee table and a couple of flashlights scattered around. It wasn't the worst situation. It felt cozy, even, with the rain beating against the windows and the occasional flash of lightning lighting up the whole room like a strobe light. The kids, my son, Ethan, who's 10, and my daughter, Lily, who's 7, were pretty excited. They'd gotten used to the storm by then, so we decided to play a board game. I remember the sound of the dice rattling in my hand. My wife was sitting next to me, flipping through a magazine to pass the time. The wind howled outside, and we'd all gotten pretty comfortable, almost forgetting about the storm. I can't tell you exactly when it happened, but there was a moment when the storm seemed to quiet down. And that's when I heard it, a faint creak, like the floorboards shifting upstairs. It wasn't a loud noise, but in the eerie silence that had taken over the house, it felt deafening. My family froze, and I could see it in their eyes. They all heard it, too. Ethan's eyes darted toward the stairs, his little hand gripping the side of the couch, as if he was expecting someone to come down any second. Lily scooted closer to her mom, burying her face in Jessica's side. I tried to act like it was nothing, just the house settling. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. We were all downstairs. No one had been upstairs for hours. The guest bedroom door was closed. I remember glancing at the clock. It was around 8 p.m., and the wind had started howling even louder, rattling the windows like a sinister warning. I glanced at my wife. Her face was pale. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, standing up slowly, trying to act like I wasn't freaking out. I didn't want to scare the kids, but deep down, I felt it in my gut, the unmistakable sensation that something was terribly off. "Stay here," I told Jessica, trying to keep my voice steady. "Lock the basement door. Keep the kids there." My heart was hammering in my chest as I grabbed the flashlight. I held it tightly, the cold metal comforting in my grip as I moved silently toward the stairs. Every step creaked beneath my feet. I remember how it felt like my whole body was vibrating with the tension of not knowing what was happening upstairs. The stairs seemed endless. I moved as quietly as I could, each creak of the wood under my feet like a shout in the silence. As I reached the top, I froze. The door to the guest bedroom was slightly ajar. Not enough for anyone to be able to see inside, but just enough that there was a faint sliver of light spilling out from the crack. The light inside the room was weird, almost flickering as though it was moving. I squinted, peering through the gap, and then I saw him. A man drenched from head to toe in rainwater. He wore a dark hoodie, the hood pulled low over his face. He was rummaging through the drawers in the guest bedroom like he knew exactly what he was looking for. I stood frozen in place. My breath caught in my throat. The flashlight in my hand felt heavier than ever. I knew if I made any sound, he'd hear me. I had to think quickly. If I went upstairs to confront him, I was alone, and I didn't know how many others might be here. I backed away as slowly and silently as I could. My heart was racing, each beat feeling louder than the last. I didn't dare take my eyes off the door as I moved back down the stairs. I made my way to the basement door, where my wife and kids were hiding, and I locked it with shaking hands. The sound of the lock clicking shut made my breath feel trapped in my chest. I grabbed my phone, dialing 911, but the storm interference made the signal weak. It took me 3 tries before I finally got through. 911, what's your emergency? A woman's voice asked, her tone calm, but there was panic behind it. There's someone in my house, I whispered, my voice shaking. They're upstairs. I don't know if there's more of them. Please send help. We're in the basement. Stay on the line, she said. Help is on the way. I hung up, my hands shaking so much I could barely hold the phone, my ears strained to listen, every second feeling like an eternity. I could hear the storm outside picking up again, the wind roaring louder, as if it was trying to drown out the real threat in the house. I heard footsteps. The man was coming downstairs, slow and deliberate, like he knew I was here, hiding. The floor creaked above me. The basement was quiet, and I could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on us. Each step he took was muffled by the storm, but I could feel it in my bones, the slow, measured rhythm of his movements as he approached the basement door. My blood ran cold. The handle jiggled. Just once, but it was enough to make my heart stop. I held my breath, waiting, praying the police would arrive in time. The door handle rattled again. The man was testing it, trying to get in. He was so close, too close. I gripped the flashlight, my knuckles white with tension. My wife held Lily and Ethan close to her, whispering to them, trying to keep them calm. I could feel the fear in her body, the way her hands shook against my arm. I wanted to say something, anything, but I couldn't. My mouth was dry. Then, sirens. The sound of police sirens, distant at first but growing louder, clearer. The man froze. The sirens were getting closer, and then, without warning, the man yanked on the basement door with all his strength. The lock rattled, but it held. But just as he began pulling harder, there was the unmistakable sound of police boots thundering down the street. I didn't know how much time had passed. I was holding my breath, waiting. Seconds felt like hours. But finally, the door flew open, and 2 officers burst in, their flashlights blinding in the darkness. The man didn't get far. They caught him 2 streets away, trying to flee on foot. It turns out he wasn't just a burglar. He was a wanted fugitive, part of a string of violent home invasions in neighboring counties. The man had been on the run for months, and his record included assaults and robberies that had ended in bloodshed. My family was shaken, but we were unharmed. The storm outside eventually passed, but the fear didn't. Every time a thunderstorm rolls in, I feel it all over again. The icy grip of that night. The storm may have faded, but the echoes of what happened that night still linger. I had been visiting an old college friend out near the Piney Woods region, the kind of place where the trees are so thick you barely see the sky. After a long night of catching up over wine and bad takeout, I was ready to head back home, a couple of hours south. It was already dark when I hit the road, but I didn't mind. I grew up out here, so the back roads weren't anything unfamiliar. The rain started slow at first, just a little drizzle, Nothing that'd make me reach for the wipers right away. But then it picked up. Hard. By the time I passed the last few houses on the outskirts of the town, the sky had opened up and sheets of rain were slamming against the windshield. Every now and then, a flash of lightning would streak across the sky, illuminating the narrow road ahead in white light, and for a split second, I'd see the woods stretching out endlessly on either side. I couldn't help but feel small in all that darkness. I tried to ignore the gnawing unease creeping up my spine as I pressed my foot down a little harder on the gas pedal. But then, like a punch to the gut, my car sputtered. I swear it shuddered, like it had just given up. And then it completely died. No warning, no nothing. Just a sudden, heart-stopping silence. I immediately cursed under my breath and tried to restart it, but the engine just made a weak, sputtering sound before falling silent again. I glanced at the dashboard, seeing nothing but the empty lights glaring back at me. The rain kept pounding harder and harder, the windshield wipers barely keeping up, and my phone had no signal. Not a single bar. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere. And the worst part, I couldn't even see anything beyond the darkness. The woods around me swallowed up any hint of civilization. I sat there for a moment, trying to wrap my mind around the situation when something else happened. A pair of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. I blinked, wondering if I was imagining it. The headlights grew brighter, pulling up behind me, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Finally, someone else on this road. The truck pulled up beside me, and the rain was falling so hard that I couldn't even see the driver's face clearly through the window. The guy rolled down his window, and I immediately caught a whiff of something like old leather mixed with cigarettes. The man's voice was gravelly, but friendly enough. "Hey there," he called out. "You need some help?" I quickly rolled my window down, a little hesitant but desperate. "My car just died. I'm stuck out here. You wouldn't happen to have a jumper, would you?" He chuckled, though I could sense a slight hesitation. "No jumper, but I can give you a ride into town if you need one. Looks like that storm's only getting worse." It wasn't like I had many options. I could sit in the car and hope it miraculously started again, or I could take him up on the ride. Against my better judgment, I agreed. "I appreciate it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I grabbed my purse, locked the car doors, and climbed into the passenger seat of his truck. The man introduced himself as Ray. He had a heavy Texas drawl, the kind that made me think he probably grew up in the country. The truck smelled like dust and something else I couldn't quite place. He was probably in his 50s, maybe early 60s. Hard to tell with the dark and the rain. As we rolled down the road, the storm seemed to pick up intensity. Rain splashed against the truck, making the world outside look like a blur. Ray kept up the small talk, asking where I was headed, how I was doing, if I had any family around. But the questions started to feel a little too personal, like he was probing. "You live alone?" he asked, glancing over at me. "What brings a pretty young thing like you out this way?" I forced a smile. "Just visiting an old friend. We went to college together." Ray nodded, but his gaze lingered a little longer than it should have. "You ever find yourself out here, just driving around? You ever worry about what could happen to a person like you in the dark? No one around to help." The question hung in the air, and I could feel my stomach tighten. I wasn't exactly sure what to say. Something about his tone, the way he spoke, was starting to set off alarm bells in my head. The rain intensified as we hit a patch of rougher road, and Ray veered off the main highway without warning, taking a smaller, narrower path. The truck bumped over rocks and ruts in the road, and I gripped the armrest, suddenly wishing I hadn't agreed to this. "You know," he said, still talking, but in a lower voice now, "main road's washed out just up ahead, ain't no way to get through. I know a shortcut though, ain't much farther, just a little trail through the woods." I felt a knot in my stomach. My instincts were screaming at me to tell him to turn around. But instead, I just nodded and tried to act calm. All right. The truck bounced along the muddy path, and the trees seemed to close in tighter around us, the darkness growing more oppressive. A flash of lightning illuminated the woods for a second, and I saw something move, just a shadow darting between the trees. I told myself it was probably just an animal, but the unease in my gut was growing by the second. Ray didn't seem to notice, or maybe he did, but he didn't seem bothered. Instead, his questions started to get even stranger. "So, what's the deal with you, huh? Got anyone waiting for you?" I felt my heart start to race, and I couldn't keep the tremor out of my voice when I responded, I have a family. They're probably wondering where I am." He didn't say anything at first, just nodded. Something was off about this guy, and I knew I had to get out. I fumbled with the door handle, trying to stay calm. "Hey, I think I'm gonna be sick. Can you stop for a second?" Ray's face twisted in frustration, but he didn't say anything at first. Finally, after a long silence, he sighed and pulled over. The truck jolted to a stop, and I didn't hesitate for a second. I threw open the door and bolted into the rain, barely feeling the mud beneath my feet. I stumbled through the trees, not looking back. I didn't know how far I ran, but eventually I saw the faint glow of a porch light through the downpour. My legs were numb from the cold and the mud, but I pushed myself toward it. I knocked frantically at the door, almost falling forward as the door swung open. A woman, probably in her 60s, stood there, her face lined with age but kind. "What's wrong, honey?" she asked, her eyes widening as she took in my soaked and trembling form. I quickly told her what happened, barely getting the words out between gasps for breath. She ushered me inside, locked the door behind me, and immediately picked up the phone. She called the sheriff's office without hesitation. I don't know how long it took for the deputies to arrive, but when they did, they found Ray's truck parked just down the road. Not long after, they arrested him. When they searched his truck, they found zip ties, a roll of duct tape, a hunting knife wrapped in a towel under the passenger seat, and a few other unsettling items. I never drove those back roads again. And every time the rain starts to fall, my chest tightens, my heart pounds in my ears, and I have no idea what would have happened if I hadn't managed to get out of that truck. It was just supposed to be a few weeks of quiet solitude. My parents were out of town for the month, and I was stuck at home in the middle of nowhere. An old, creaky ranch house deep in central Texas. We lived just outside a tiny, practically forgotten town, a place that even the locals only pass through if they're lost. The house itself was the kind of place you'd expect to see in horror movies. Isolated, run down, with peeling paint on the front porch and a fence that looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The land stretched out for miles in every direction, covered in dry grass and wild brush, with nothing but the occasional rusting tractor or dilapidated barn to break up the emptiness. I had planned on using the time to focus on my studies. I was in college and needed to buckle down for finals, so I figured the isolation would help me concentrate. It was just me, the house, and the stormy weather that seemed to roll in every night. It wasn't the best situation, but I could manage. The first night it stormed, the wind howled and rain battered the roof. The house creaked and groaned in the wind, and I tried to ignore it. I'd lived in this house most of my life, so I was used to the sounds even when they gave me the chills. But that night, there was something else. I'd been sitting at the kitchen table, cramming for a test, when I heard a loud metallic bang. It wasn't like the usual sounds of the wind or the trees hitting the side of the house. This was sharper, more distinct. I froze, listening for a moment. Another bang, then another. It seemed to come from the back of the property, near the old barn. I figured it was just the storm messing with the barn doors again. They were always loose, and would clang around in the wind. But still, something didn't sit right with me. I stood up, went to the windows, and checked all the locks, something I always did before bed. I told myself it was nothing, just the storm. I turned off the lights and crawled into bed, trying to drown out the noise of the storm with the hum of my music. It was around 11 p.m. when the banging started again. This time, though, it wasn't coming from the barn. It was closer. I pulled the headphones out of my ears and strained to listen. The noise was sharp, rhythmic, like something or someone was hitting metal with a heavy object. But now it was unmistakably near the back door of the house. I stood up slowly, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and made my way through the dark hallways, heart pounding. I didn't want to turn on the lights and risk being seen. As I passed the back porch, I froze. The door handle was moving, not just shaking with the wind, but being deliberately jiggled, slowly. The kind of motion that makes your skin crawl because you know someone's doing it on purpose. Someone was outside. My mind raced. I ducked down instinctively, peering through the side window next to the door. There, standing in the rain, was a figure. He was hunched low, completely drenched, wearing a dark hoodie that covered most of his face. I couldn't make out any details, but I could tell he was trying the door handle, tugging it at first, and then pushing and pulling with more force. His gloved hands gripped the handle with surprising confidence. I backed away from the window, my breath catching in my throat. My first instinct was to call the sheriff's office, so I grabbed my phone with shaky hands. I dialed and the operator answered quickly. After I told them about the situation, they assured me that a deputy would be on their way soon. The phone call ended, and I stood in the darkness of the hallway, my pulse thundering in my ears. I knew I couldn't stay in the hall forever. I had to keep an eye on the man outside, but if I moved too much, he might hear me. I stayed there, barely breathing, listening for any other noises, my mind spiraling through worst-case scenarios. Then, just as I was about to make a move, I heard the unmistakable sound of the side door rattling. It was him again. He was moving around the house, checking every entrance, trying to find a way in. I held my breath. I knew I had to lock myself in a room, but I couldn't make a sound. The thought of him being so close, his presence so real and dangerous, made me feel like I was suffocating. My brain screamed at me to move, but I couldn't. I stayed absolutely still, listening to the slow, methodical footsteps as he circled the house. I don't know how long I stayed there, frozen in the hallway, but eventually, my body couldn't take the anxiety anymore. I bolted from the hallway and ran to my bedroom, slamming the door behind me. I locked it quickly, my hands trembling as I slid the bolt into place. I crawled into bed, pulling the covers over my head like a child, but I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. Every crack of thunder, every gust of wind made me jump. The worst part was that I couldn't hear him anymore. The footsteps had stopped. For a moment, it was just me and the storm, but in the back of my mind, I kept wondering if he was still out there, just waiting for me to slip up. I checked my phone, no new messages from the sheriff. It felt like hours before I finally saw flashing lights through the trees, too far off to be of any real help. By then, I'd heard the sound of someone running through the rain, fast and frantic. The deputy arrived just as I was starting to calm down. He combed the area around the house and barn, but there was nothing. I showed him where I'd seen the man, but he couldn't find anything. No fingerprints, no forced entry, nothing. The deputy said it was probably just a drunk local messing around, but I knew better. Something about the way he moved, methodical, careful, like he knew exactly where to go, it didn't sit right with me. Since that night, I've tried to convince myself it was just a random occurrence. But deep down, I know someone had been watching me, waiting for the right moment to make his move. And it's only been a few months since that night. Every time the wind howls through the trees, I can't help but wonder, Is he still watching? That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, the Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the vault awaits your return.